Hello and welcome to the first ever Livebytes webinar. This webinar will be about building a text analysis dashboard. In this presentation, you will learn all about AWS Comprehend, Elasticsearch, and also Kibana. So what we'll be going into is like what are the things that you need to build this kind of a dashboard. If you have any questions during the webinar, just send them in through the YouTube chat, and I'll look at them at the end of the webinar. So let's start with a little bit of a backstory. So there was a reason why I looked into these kind of things like text analysis and stuff like that. I work at a company that works with a lot of reviews, and what we've noticed is that the reviews have the most kind of information that everybody wants to see. So say for instance you have a text or whatever, you can just see what someone is saying, right? You can have a positive sentiment or a negative sentiment. So that's something that we find really interesting, but we rarely use. So we usually use like the numbers, so a rating or something similar to that. So what we saw was like, okay, if we can use this AWS Comprehend, for example, and see what an actual positive score could be, or a sentiment score, or see the key phrases that people are using a lot, you can give clients more input and more kind of information about what they can do. So that's the kind of backstory that we have behind this. So we started with just seeing like, okay, what can AWS Comprehend do? And then we're like, okay, how can we make a dashboard out of this? So let's talk a little bit about what AWS Comprehend is. So AWS Comprehend is kind of an API that AWS has made. And what it does is you can just send your text to it in a few languages, and it will give you, for example, if you say, I want to have the sentiment, it will give you a score, a few scores actually. It will give you a score of, say for instance, positive is 97%, and the other ones make up the other 3%. That means that you can have, for example, a text that says, I love it. It will probably be a positive sentiment. So you will get a positive score that's high, and also an actual positive, an actual positive rating. So it will be rated as positive. This AWS Comprehend is great because usually what you had to do was train a big data set of text and have it go through. You have to like train it and have a lot of data to get this kind of analysis out of it. And AWS Comprehend basically does that for you. So you don't need to train that data set yourself. There's just an API endpoint. You just call it, and it will give you back a result. And the same goes for a key phrase. So if you want to have key phrases, say for instance, I love the car. The car would be the key phrase in this kind of sentence. So it will give you that back. So AWS Comprehend is basically the way to just call it, get back some analysis on it, and you can go from there. So what we'll also be using is Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is kind of a search engine / database, and you can push, in this case, what we'll be doing, we'll be pushing JSON objects to it and seeing what you can do with it. So when in this Elasticsearch, you will also see, and we're going to do that through Kibana, which I'll get to in a second. You can also see like all the things that you send through, and then based on that, you can query it fast and make all kinds of filters based on the things that you send to Elasticsearch in this case. And then, of course, Kibana, as I said, it's the GUI for Elasticsearch. So you'll see that you can make all kinds of dashboards, but also can like really fast, in a fast manner, can search through that data. So if you want to have all the people that were positive sentiment, you can just do that, and it will give you that back pretty quickly. So Kibana is the thing that we're going to use to actually visualize the data. We're going to be using a hosted version and a hosted version of Elasticsearch and Kibana. Why I'm doing that is just that's the easiest way to do it. They have a 14-day free trial, which you can just use. And in this case, you can just sign up without a credit card, deploy a cluster, and start working and trying to insert data into this into Elasticsearch. So that's why I'm using the hosted setup. It's just for easy access and easy setup, especially if you haven't worked with it, and it's the best way to get into it for the first time. And in the end, what I'll be using a kind of Python script that takes the text from a particular file, parses them, and parses them through AWS Comprehend, and then pushes them to Elasticsearch, and then we'll go to Kibana, and you can have a look at how the data is structured, but also how you can create all kinds of visualizations. So let's get into it, because I think it's cool to see like the things that you need to actually get this process going. So let me just switch out of this, and we'll get into the code. All right. So I've created this script called Analyzer, and basically what I'll be doing is calling it from the terminal, giving it a particular text file, which I'll get to in a second, and it will parse them, create these JSON objects that I want to insert into Elasticsearch, and then push them to this particular thing. So for you, if you want to know all about the script, I'll be going through it step by step. But just before we do that, you need to have some requirements to do this. So you need Bodo3, which is the package for Amazon. That's their own package that they use, their own SDK. You need Elasticsearch, which is the official package for Elasticsearch for Python. Then you have Certify. Certify, we'll get to in a second what that's used for. But you also need PyYAML, which I use for my config file. I don't want to have my API keys and stuff like that inside of the script, so I've put them in a separate YAML file. Then in the end, you have the reviews.txt. So the reviews.txt is just a test file that I created with 495 reviews. These reviews are basically reviews about Alexa. So these are real reviews that people gave to kind of rate Alexa and see like, okay, this is the thing that I like this, I don't like this, whatever it is. You will see in a second like what AWS Comprehend kind of gets out of that, and also what you can do with that in Elasticsearch and Kibana. So let's get back to the script, because that's the interesting part here. I'll be going through it step by step. So in the first in the first section here, you obviously import the packages that you need. So Bodo3 that I just mentioned in the requirements, but also some things like argparse, which I will get into just briefly in this webinar. But also of course the Elasticsearch and the clients that you need, and the SDKs that you need for that. So what you start off with is you need to open a session to Amazon, in this case, or in Amazon Web Services. What you do with that is you create a session, basically. And in that session, you give a profile name. You can see that here. And that profile name corresponds to something that I have in the credentials file. So if I have a credentials file in my .aws folder, in my home folder, there is a profile in there called text analysis with specific kind of access key IDs that I can use. On the other hand, I have the Comprehend client that uses that session, and I'll be calling that, which we'll get to in a second. But you can see like, okay, I need to have the get sentiment, or I want to have the get key phrases, or something similar to that. Some generic stuff that I use to just load into the config file is here. So I'll get to get the real path of the script, and then load the YAML file so you can call it from anywhere in your system. Then some of the config that you need for making a connection to Elasticsearch, which you can see here. So these CFG kind of variables I use by basically loading in the YAML, and then getting some of the variables that have been set in there. So for example, my URL, my Elasticsearch URL, but also the API ID and the API key, which you need to actually do the call to Elasticsearch to index, or to do other stuff that you want to do within Elasticsearch. Then the arc parser, if you haven't used arc parser before, it's a very cool kind of package that you have for Python. If you want to build Python scripts, it's very easy to give arguments to a particular script. So say for instance, I'll be using both of these that are mentioned here, which is the dash dash file for the actual file, and that would be the reviews.txt. And the dash dash debug, I'll put that to 1 so you can see what's actually happening. So it's just a little bit of a verbose thing that you can see what's going on. Then we'll be looking at some of the variables. Of course, these variables are just being set so I can use them later on. And the args.file corresponds to the arc parse above it. So it kind of gets that value that you put in there. I'll be using the debug as 1, so that also means that I'll be, when I do that, it will actually delete my index first, and an index within Elasticsearch is basically a kind of a database which you have, for example, in MySQL, or it's kind of similar to that. So I'll be just working off a clean slate when I do a debug, because I just want to clean up everything and insert the new data that I want to insert. You have this count is 0, which I'll get to in a second. It's a little bit below what I use that for. Then, of course, I'll be opening the file. So the file itself has a review per line. So it will be going through that file. It will actually open the file, read through all the lines, and every line it will actually do something. And that's why it's called in a variable. So you'll see that I'll be looping over that variable just to get every line within the file. So that's what's happening here. So you have the for loop that goes through all the text that you have. So after that, inside of that for loop, we'll be doing the actual sentiment call. So to unpack that a little bit, I'm creating a variable called sentiment call. And then there is a comprehend client. The comprehend client corresponds with the comprehend client that I set up here, so it knows to connect to Amazon if I do that. These settings that you can see, so the text and the language code, those are settings that are all documented by AWS. So if you want to start working on that, you have their documentation for that. You can have a look at that. But you will basically be using the text, and the text is one review within the file, of course, and the language code, which is EN in this case because we're using English. And the cool part about this is they have multiple languages, so they have Spanish and some other languages. We were using Dutch, so what happened with us is that we actually did a translation first, which Amazon has as well. They have a translate server for that, a service for that, and we translated it first and then pushed it through this kind of sentiment analysis. It's not the best because you still have these kind of broken up sentences, but in most cases it's actually pretty correct, and that's also something cool to see. I hope they add Dutch in the future, but this is how we did it before. Then if we go further, we can see that I actually get the sentiment from that call. So the sentiment call is of course this one, and I get the one kind of it's kind of inside of the JSON that you get back. You get a sentiment value, and a sentiment value can be positive, negative, neutral, or mixed. So let's get into that a little bit. So a positive one, of course, everybody knows, is I love it. It's great. So that will positively be a positive. And then on the other hand, you have a negative, which can be, oh yeah, this service sucks. I don't like it. It's a negative. And the third one is a neutral, like, yeah, it's okay, right? It's okay. It's fine. That's kind of a neutral sentiment. And then you have the mixed, which is the most interesting one to me, at least. Is like, okay, I loved Alexa, but I loved everything it could do, but the speaker was not loud enough. So that's kind of a mixed sentiment that you can get. Then you get the scores. So those were the scores that I talked about in the beginning a little bit. So these are scores like, okay, 97, you'll actually get 0.97 back for example positive. So you know that it's they're almost certain that it's a positive text. And we'll be using that, of course, to actually in the dashboard get some scores over all the reviews that we have. So we'll start by making a data JSON, and the data JSON is actually the data that we're going to push to Elasticsearch, which you can later on query from Kibana itself. So we're starting with that here, where we actually pick up the sentiment that's been set here, and the text itself, so you know what kind of text it corresponds with. After that, we'll pick up all the scores, because all of the actually in this sentiment score we'll get all the items. So we want to have all the scores in there so we can see and compare them and make averages and stuff like that. So we'll get them inside of the data JSON as well, where it will be score underscore positive, or score underscore negative, or score underscore neutral, or mixed. So basically that's what we're doing here. And as I said, you'll get that as a 0.97 or something like that. So what we do is actually convert that to a percentage. So in the data itself, it will already be a percentage. Then the key phrases. So as I said, the key phrases are things that we use for example, if I say I love the car would be the key phrase in this case. And this is cool because you can do all kinds of stuff with it. You can see the amount of times that someone mentioned the car, or mentioned Alexa, or mentioned whatever. And after that, you can just say, oh, I want to have a word cloud out of that. You can actually do that within Kibana, and we'll be doing that in the webinar as well. So what I'll do here is I'll get the key phrases as I did with the sentiment. If there are key phrases, because that's also an important part, then we'll be adding those to the data JSON. And here we get to another debug statement. This is basically a statement just to show you within the terminal where we are at, so which number of the reviews we're at. So that's the count that you saw up here. Here it is. So it will, every time the for loop passes it, it will just increment with 1, and you know which review we're actually analyzing at the time. This other debug statement is basically there for just showing, okay, this is the data that's going to be inserted. So you would see JSONs going through your screen in the terminal. And the last thing, which is the most important thing, is actually indexing it inside of Elasticsearch. So you have this ES, which we set up here, and it will index. So what it basically will do is, if there is no index, it will create that index called, in this case, text analysis. So this particular database, or index as it's called in Elasticsearch, will be called text analysis. The cool thing is that we will be sending over the body, and the body is, of course, the data JSON that we've created in the previous kind of steps. And you need to have an ID. So I just said a UUID. That's a kind of just randomly generated string, which is going to be our kind of ID for that particular record that we insert. So enough talk about how the script works. If you have any questions, as I said, just ask them at the end. I can go through it and explain it a little bit to you as well. Just ask it in the YouTube chat, and I will get to it at the end. So let's see how this works. So I have this folder which I'm in, and you can see that I have the analyzer.py. So what's cool is if I see what I'm doing. So the arc parse that I was talking about is actually the thing that you're doing here. So you're doing --file reviews.txt. So it will know, like, okay, the file has to be reviews.txt. And I'm setting the debug to 1 because I want to show you what you actually get from this kind of thing, and what you'll get as data, but also the text that we're analyzing at the time. So let's just run this and see what happens. So if we just press enter, what it will do is get every text, and you see it will be it will go pretty fast. As I said, I have 495, so I have some room to talk about it. But you can see, like, okay, this is the first text, and then the data that's going to be inserted. In this case, this is the data JSON that we were talking about in the script. So if I go to my Kibana, because I can already do that, if I go to Discover, so this is the Kibana dashboard to just to iterate. If you go to the Discover, it will give you all the records that are in that particular index. You need to create an index pattern. If you don't know how to do that, you will get, when you start pushing data to it, you will actually have the option to create that index pattern and just go through the motions so you'll get to that. So you see that it already has these 143 hits. Within a few, it will have all of them. But let's look at one of the ones that have been inserted already. So this is the JSON that we basically inserted into the index in Elasticsearch. So what you see is the kind of first few are the four particular ones: underscore index, underscore type, underscore version, underscore score, are just randomly generated by Elasticsearch. I didn't do anything for that. Of course, I gave the index text analysis, so that's one of the things that I did give, and of course the ID that I set within the data JSON. Then you have the source block, and the source block is one, the text, and that's the data. It's actually the data JSON. So you can see the text, you can see the sentiment, you can see the score positive, score negative, score neutral, score mixed, and the key phrases. So as you can see, it's a really great thing to see all these kind of things. So if you refresh this, for example, because I think it's done. Yep, it's done. So you'll see that I have 495 hits. So what can we do with this? So if I just put in a filter here, because I can just basically filter on all these kind of values that I have, all these kind of things that I inserted. So I can, for example, go to sentiment and say sentiment is, and I can just put in positive. So if I save that, it will actually put on a filter on on the data set that you have right now, so within the index. So you can see that it just pushes, it gets everything that's a positive sentiment. If I change it, I can change it to, for example, negative. It will give me all of the sentiments that are negative, of course. So if I basically say, okay, I want everyone that said something negative about me, I can do, of course, is not. Yes, so I'll do negative, and you'll see that it will actually give you all of the negative ones. It's in some cases you can see that it's not, they're not completely sure, and you'll get a lower score. But in most cases they are correct. So when you have these kind of things, of course it's cool to query them and see all the negative ones and query them fast. But you can, of course, also make the visualizations that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So let's get into the visualizations, because that's the coolest thing, I think, within this kind of piece of software. So I'm going to create a metric, and a metric is basically just a value. So I'm going to put in the 4 values for the sentiment scores. So what I'll do, as you can see, it already kind of sets it to automatically to count. I'm going to be doing an average on the field, in this case score positive, and I can add another one and do it based on score negative. Then I'll do the last one, the second to last one. So let's do the neutral, and then the last one will be the mixed one. So, all right. And then you need to just press play here, and it will create that visualization for you. So you can see that it will give you an average of the score positive over all of the records that we have within that index. And you can see it's 79.747 in positive, and then the negative, the neutral, and the score mix. So you can see that Alexa is getting a pretty good score based on just these 495 reviews. What you can do with this is this visualization will save. So we'll save it as sentiment scores percentage. So every time we get to this visualize screen, we'll be able to just click on it and get the visualization itself. But that's not what you want. You want to have all of them in a dashboard. So the option next to visualize is a dashboard. And I already created one. You can just create a dashboard for yourself if you want to, but let's see. Yeah, it doesn't have this one. This is an old one that I had. So let's just delete this one. And what I can do now is just add a visualization. So I can just add the sentiment scores percentage that I created. And then you can see that this is the visualization that I just created in the visualize screen. So what happens if I want to have more of these? So let's just save this dashboard for a second. You can pick if you want to save it as a new dashboard, and you can also save a time with it. So you can switch back to a particular time and place. But let's go to visualize because we want to make some more things that we want on our dashboard. So let's do a word cloud. So let's do this one. It will just load in a sec. And what we'll do is actually do it based on accounts. So we want to know which ones are occurring the most, and you add a bucket. So a bucket is basically kind of a split or a thing that you want to split on. So let's do it based on terms, and in this case, I'm going to do it on key phrases because I want to know the key phrases. And let's say we want to have the 20 most occurring key phrases. So let's just play that. And what you'll see is that it will give you a word cloud that has the key phrases that are being said most, of course, in this case for all of the particular reviews. So what I can do here, as I did in the Discover page as well, is add a filter. So I can add a filter based on sentiment and say I want to have all of the positive ones. So I want to have positive. Save. And you'll see that the word cloud will change in a sec, where it will give you all of the words that have been occurring the most with the sentiment positive in this case. And as I saw, you have Alexa, which is usually the one that's going to be talked about most in these kind of reviews. So you can also say, I don't want to have that in there. I want to have I don't want to have Alexa in there. So I'll do is not, and I can just click on Alexa. Let's do it the right way. Save. And it will remove Alexa and give you the next one that has the most occurrences. So you see that it just shifts around this particular word cloud in this case. So let's save this word cloud as word cloud positive. All right, so we can go back to the dashboard and just save it and add it to the dashboard, I mean. So let's go back to the dashboard. It will automatically open the one that I was on last. Let's edit it. And let's add the one that we just created. So let's add the sentiment scores percentage. and you'll see that no, I didn't need to do that one. I needed the word cloud, of course, not the percentages. So let's just add that one. Word cloud positive. That's the one that we wanted. And you'll see that it's on your dashboard. So what can you do with this? Of course, you can make this shareable or have it on a TV. For example, if say for instance you have these reviews coming in on a regular basis, you can just have this dashboard set up on a TV or whatever and show kind of all the reviews that are coming in. And maybe there is something that pops up a lot. So say for instance you've changed something in your customer service. If customer service, for example, comes in a lot in the negative column, then you know that something is wrong in this case. So you can monitor what's happening. So that's the cool thing that you can do with this word cloud, and what you can actually see. So what you of course can do is go back to the visualize, create a word cloud based on the negative ones, and then have that word cloud next to this word cloud in this case. And then what you can also do, because we don't see the amount of occurrences here, you can also just create a table which has all of the key phrases in them and the occurrences, how many times it actually occurred to within these kind of review texts. So that's the kind of easiest way to create these kind of dashboards where you can see all these kind of things. This is all based on just plain text, not ratings, no external data, just plain. This is what people said, and this is what we got. So that's all of the things that I wanted to discuss within the webinar this time. You can find me on these particular platforms. So I have Twitter, which is actually Amer. You have LinkedIn. If you want to contact me, feel free to do that. I am freelancing now, so you can find all about that on my site called Livebytes, and also my email is amer@livebytes, and you can just send me an email if you have questions about these kind of topics, but also general topics about AWS or anything that's IT related. So I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any questions, but if there are any questions afterwards, just send me an email or hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we can go from there. So that's it for now, and I would like to thank you for watching, and we'll keep in touch.